Hey, everybody, welcome back to Unapologetically Outspoken. Today, we have a guest that we think you guys are going to find really interesting. His perspective is going to be very cool. He is not our typical conservative or moderate guest. His name is Adam Swart, and he is a lifelong liberal and free speech advocate. And back in 2012, he founded an organization called Crowds on Demand. And this is a paid protesting firm that helps to organize, rally, and advocate for various causes, including things like paid protests to get media attention. So, Adam has a lot of expertise on how protests are funded and coordinated and how they can be weaponized to shape a specific narrative. So, you might be wondering why Adam is coming on the podcast to share this knowledge with us. And we're going to let Adam tell the story in his own words. But we are definitely intrigued because, as Adam will share with us, he is no longer considered liberal enough for the left, and he is now speaking out about how optics are used to manipulate the media, how they can provoke both the left and the right, and disguise elite interests as grassroots outrage. So, Adam, welcome to the podcast, and we are super excited to have you here. And let's dive into your story.
Great to be with you, Tara and Stephanie. And a little bit about Crowds on Demand. As you said, we were founded in 2012. We've been around for 13 years now. We're the largest protest company in the country, perhaps in the world. I don't even know. But in regards to why I'm here today and why I'm speaking to various media, it's very important to do two things. Number one, to completely disassociate what we do at Crowds on Demand with any form of violence or law breaking protest under the guise of protest, which we've seen a lot in the past, more from the left, but than from the right, but sometimes from the right. I like to stress that law breaking is not a valid form of protest. We have what's called the First Amendment, which is a beautiful thing. We should use our First Amendment to express our rights peacefully, number one. Number two, to clarify the idea of what incentivized activism is. Paid protesting has this sort of connotation that some people don't like. People think it means that it's illegitimate or people don't actually support the views. I always like to make the point that actually our people are compensated to express their legitimate views, but because life is so expensive, people have kids, especially on the conservative side, you have to pay. It's more difficult because conservatives are more likely to have families, kids, responsibilities to get folks out to events. You actually have to compensate them for their time, just like an attorney, just like a talk show host is compensated for their time. So to set the record straight there is so important. And number three is just to talk about free speech. And I don't love attacks on free speech. I don't care if it comes from the left under Biden, like the parents, speaking at school board meetings, or what Trump is doing to, I think, attack free speech in terms of colleges and universities and immigrants. And I don't like any of it. I love free speech and I want to protect it. And I don't owe any allegiance to any party. So that's why I'm here.
Excellent. So I have one question for you to start off with. What inspired you to start this company originally?
Sure. So I worked on a lot of political campaigns in college, mostly on the Democratic side. As you said, I've been a kind of liberal leaning person for a long time. Um, Worked for the Jerry Brown. He was the governor of California.
Yep.
His campaign. And interesting, I think I don't even know whether his views would be welcome in the Democratic Party at this point because he was really willing to buck a lot of party orthodoxy. But what inspired me is I was organizing. I was in charge of all the campus organizing for the campaign in Southern California. And the guys running the campaign were these kind of old ex-hippies out of the 60s, right? And they'd be like, Adam, get me together like 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 students. And I was like, guys, this is like quite a task here. This isn't like 1965, right? So they just thought they operated in an era where organizing huge groups was easy because people were very politically active and there weren't competing forms of entertainment, as there were in the early 2010s when I was in college. So the so I was inspired and I found that, even incentivizing people, buying people a meal, buying people pizza would actually get people out, even to go out to a rally, go out to a protest. And of course, a rally with 200 people in it is much different than 10 people watching a speech. And more impactfully, guys, is that the opposing candidate could be having a rally with 5,000 people, but if we put 20 protesters outside, the media would cover those two events equally, right? So with 20 people, we can change the whole context of which a 5,000 person opposing rally is covered, because they're covering this person's giving the speech and then these protesters are disagreeing with the speech, right? Which is kind of a typical media narrative. So I was noticing I was bringing probably hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in what's called earned media to the campaign. And for your listeners, earned media is basically what it would cost to buy that amount of media coverage if you bought it as ads, right? So the media coverage that we were generating was so high, right, from protests and rallies, that and the pay that we were getting as campaign organizers was very, very low. And so I got to thinking, hey, what if we could make a business based on such things? And and that's how it was born in Los Angeles in 2012, and we started expanding to do more than politics, more than business, and continuing to kind of expand, and now we're nationwide and we do a whole bunch of things.
I want to get your opinion on something because I think about this all the time, how the left is really good at organizing large crowds, organizing protests. I don't feel like the right is as good, meaning like something can happen and you'll see on college campuses a ton of people on the left all in the streets talking about it. I feel like on the right, you might see that more online or more like silently protesting by like not buying a product, boycotting a product or something like that. But I feel like the right could do better in terms of, I don't know, just reaching out to people, maybe using that strategy. So
All right.
I don't know, maybe you can tell us like what is the right missing out on? How can they use what the left is doing, but in a positive way? Because what we're seeing on the left is a lot of times these things do break out to be violent or chaos, or at least that's my perception of it.
Sure. Well, one of the reasons about how the left is able to organize well is the concept of intersectionality, right? So this is a far left wing term, that the idea of I am both queer and black. I am both a woman and Native American, right? So it's these intersecting identity groups, right? So that is to say that if there is a Palestine rally, for example, BLM affiliated people, even who know nothing about Palestine, Israel, will turn out, because there's this concept that all of these movements are sort of related through the cause of social justice. So that's how the left is often able to drive turnout, because they can bring, now they'll call it coalition building, and maybe to some extent it is, but you're basically taking people who say, hey, I don't really know anything about Palestine, but they tell me that the situation of Palestinians in Gaza is similar to the situation of black people in the United States. So both are oppressed, right, from this sort of theory. And therefore, I, as a person who's in the BLM camp, are going to turn out to the Palestine rally, even knowing nothing about the complexity of the situation of Israel Palestine. So conservatives are not always great at that, right? So if you take like a conservative cause of, let's just say I'm very pro public safety. I'm really against defunding the police. Well, just because I'm really against defunding the police doesn't mean I'm going to go to an anti-abortion rally, right? A
Right.
pro-life rally,
Hmm.
right? So the conservative causes have historically not built those coalitions around the different set of conservative issues. So you have people at the public safety rally who are focused on public safety. You have people at the life rally focused on life, but you're not necessarily having the overlap of people who say, hey, I don't really know this issue, but they tell me that this issue was related to that issue, right? Um, so I think that's part of it. But I think the bigger part is the left. I think by its very nature, the left is a oppositional force. And I think in under the Biden administration, particularly, you saw a lot of ideas that were meant sort of as oppositional ideas that got into government, such as sort of the woke stuff, the ultra DEI, that were really always meant to be sort of academic protest ideas that were never actually meant to be governance ideas, if you see what I'm saying. So this was sort of a unique period. Even Obama had he didn't really buy into this stuff. He actually, like, if you hear his interviews from 08, 07, he didn't really buy into the woke agenda, and he sort of put it down. And he had sort of the political legitimacy to put it down, but Biden didn't. Um, so yeah, conservatives, I mean, that's sort of a long-winded answer to your question, but conservatives uh, often are just not as politically active. They're focused on work, they're focused on family. It's why we have a lot more conservative clients than a lot of people think, because drawing turnout and drawing activism around conservative causes can be challenging. Now, what conservative movements that have been the most successful have been ones where you're able to get the family involved, such as this school board stuff, right? Is okay, instead of saying, I'm going to go to this event and leave my kids, it's like, no, the event and the kids, it's all actually around the same focus. So maybe that's one strategy. But a lot of economic boycott strategies by conservatives have actually fallen pretty flat. I mean, there's the Bud Light one is pretty famously like successful, but it's really famously successful more because every other conservative boycott has fallen completely flat.
Yeah. No, it's definitely true. And I have noticed that, but it's just like, I feel like every time you turn around, there's a protest
Yep.
from the left and the right. There's never going to be the same turnout. But I think that's a good point, though, that someone who is pro, free speech or whatever might not be the same person that's going to go to an anti-abortion rally. And I think that the right in general has completely shifted ever since Trump, where you get people who aren't considered or they wouldn't consider themselves traditional conservatives, kind of like Tara and I. Like I hate the word conservative just because of like the way I was brought up looking at that word. But I feel like there's a new emergence of people on the right that used to be considered Democrat. Like I would have been considered very liberal like when I was in college, but I feel like all of those values now are values you're seeing more on the right, like free speech, because I feel like on the left, that's where you've seen so much censorship, um, especially on social media, or it's like if you're not going to agree with me, then I don't want to hear from you.
Yes.
Have you seen that
Oh,
as a
absolutely.
liberal?
Uh, Absolutely. I think that this is a one challenge is I think that I always tell people is I think conservatives generally think liberals are stupid, but I think that liberals generally think conservatives are hateful and evil. Um, and I think you see some on the left who are really trying to challenge those ideas, like Jon Stewart, like Bill Maher, like Ezra Klein, but those people actually get a lot of crap from the left for saying, "Hey, these people aren't evil. Let's have those conversations." Um, and so, but I think that if you think your opponent is evil, then you tend to believe censorship is more justifiable. But I also feel like when it comes to the um the coalition building, I think it's true. I think Trump has brought in on the right a lot of people who are socially maybe not liberal, but moderate. They don't necessarily, they're pro-gay marriage, but they say, hey, I don't exactly want people who are biological males in the women's sports, right? I support abortion in sort of severe cases, but I don't want it until birth, right? I I believe there's racism out there, but I don't believe it's everywhere in every institution and that we should base our government on DEI. I would say that's a fairly moderate point of view, but it's one that the Democrats have historically not welcomed. I think that if they're smart, they're going to shift that over time. But but you're also right on the social conservative point, Stephanie, that when it comes to like this whole Mike Pence type conservative of like we're gonna no being with a woman after 6 o'clock alone, right? Like this is not the prevailing, this is Pete Hegseth's Republican Party. You know what I mean? This is not Mike Pence's Republican Party, right? And this is the party of Marjorie Taylor Greene and the tantric community. This is Pete Hegseth of wife number three. And I mean, I'm not morally judging. I'm a liberal. I don't care what you do, but this is not the Mike and Karen Pence. This is not that world anymore. So, which I think has been a smart political strategy because I think that I think that the Republicans, Bill Maher says this best, have become the fun party, and the Democrats have become sort of the prudes, the ones who are not fun. Like, would you rather take a tequila shot with Marjorie Taylor Greene or Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? And I think I'd rather take a tequila shot with Marjorie Taylor Greene because she wouldn't
Well
be
put.
recording and seeing if I said something stupid.
Mhm.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to ask you about is, because you have this, traditional liberal perspective that is really not the perspective of the current Liberal Party, at
Mhm.
least from my perspective. How has this impacted crowds on demand? And like, what are you seeing that changed or that made you want to be open and speak to people like us?
Sure. Well, number one, I think that it's so important to speak to people regardless of views because I think I think there's been too much vilification on both sides. I mean, I think if you go back 20 years, you had a program on CNN called Crossfire, where you actually had Tucker Carlson, when he was not that much older than me, on it versus Paul Begala. So both of these guys are pretty big. Paul Begala is sort of a traditional Democrat. Tucker Carlson has kind of become a strong kind of like a hard right conservative. At the time, both of them were probably more moderate. But the point is, they would argue and scream at each other every single day. And people criticize that, but that was actually an improvement in one sense because then we got into siloing. Over the past several years, MSNBC, it's basically just liberals, and Fox News is basically just conservatives. Now we're starting to see that change a little bit, but I don't like siloing because, hey, at least if you say, I don't agree with Adam's views, or I could say I don't agree with Tara and Stephanie, right? But they seem like really nice people, and we agree on the values, right? So, like in 1960, the debate of Kennedy versus Nixon, right? Both, I think it was Nixon who said, "We actually agree on what we want for America. We just don't agree on how to get us there." And I want to get back to the point of, I think for the most part, yes, I tend to be more liberal in the sense of I don't believe people should die because of lack of access to healthcare. I believe we should have clean air. I believe we should have regulations to make sure there's not processed crap in our food, right? I believe we should have public transportation that's accessible to people, right? These are pretty traditional liberal views, and I think that I don't know a lot of conservatives that strongly disagree with them, right?
I, I was going to say these are common sense views, and that's what this our whole platform is about is common sense views, and those seem to be kind of have no party. Like the left has gone extreme one way, and the right has its hardcore conservative side, and then you have this middle ground that you have to claim one party or the other, but it doesn't fall in either category.
Correct. Correct. So that's why I like to go on these programs, but I give so much more credit to conservatives because I have many friends on both sides of the aisle, right? And in between. But conservatives, for the most part, are much more able to have that discussion, these discussions with disagreeing views. And just the other day, there are liberals who are, and then they get crap for it. And I'm not even talking about Gavin Newsom because he's kind of a scumbag in his own way. But one guy I love on the left is Jon Stewart. I feel like he's very honest. He's called out his own party, and he had a gentleman who was sort of, they call him a MAGA economist, on his show the other day to talk about the tariffs in defense of Trump's tariffs. And I oppose the tariffs, but whatever. I don't oppose the idea of this gentleman being able to go on the show. People hated Jon Stewart on the left for having this guy because they said, oh, you're bringing on someone who can intelligently argue for Trump's position. Oh, that's really bad, right? It's like, no, let's hear him out and let's see if he can convince people. I listened to the interview. I'm not convinced. Maybe others are, right? So I think it's so important to have that dialogue. And in terms of, I think you asked about Crowds on Demand's role in all of this. We tend to be an oppositional force, right? So, and that's not just in politics, that's in companies, right? So if you're a company that is an upstart that's trying to launch a product to displace an entrenched competitor, we're often your resource for that, versus the entrenched competitor, because protests are inherently a disruptive oppositional force. So when we're generally working for the startup, we're working for the opposition party, we're working for the person who is losing in the lawsuit, right? Because they want to change the paradigm. The person who isn't trying to change the paradigm doesn't necessarily need us as much. So in so we tend to, under Republican leadership, to work on more for Democrats, and we tend under Democratic leadership to work more for Republicans. But that's not just at a federal level, that could be local or state, for example. So in a lot of cities that are controlled by far left Democrats, we've run conservative campaigns pretty successfully, right, as an oppositional force there, right? The answer in regards to how we're navigating the Trump administration is sort of TBD, because I do oppose a lot of what Trump is doing, but I also feel that I don't want to get mixed up in the things that I think have nefarious motives.
Or like, what's an example of what you think would have a nefarious motive?
So I think there are valid concerns about the Doge department, right? And I think that it's reasonable to protest Tesla, but I think a lot of the Tesla protests are being done in bad faith. And I'll tell you why. It's because there have been what's called short sellers. So these are people who make money when a stock goes down, right? Of Tesla for many, many years. And historically, that's been a very, very bad investment to make because Tesla has skyrocketed in value over the past 10, 15 years, right, under Musk's leadership. But all these short sellers have been saying, oh, it's overvalued, but they've been literally losing a ton of money, right? Now they see an opportunity under the Trump administration, given Elon's kind of involvement with Trump and given the fact that your sort of quote unquote typical Tesla buyer is not necessarily a Trump supporter, though there are many. So they're saying, okay, there's a boycott. Okay, we can do violence. We can kind of simultaneously boycott and intimidate Tesla owners and employees. But I think the ultimate objective of that is to hurt the company, therefore hurting the stock, and therefore making money for the people who essentially are short selling the stock. And that is manipulation, and I don't necessarily want to be associated with something like that.
So are those the people that would be funding these protesters then?
Correct. In my opinion. In my opinion, I can't, I
Mhm.
have to be, I should be clear that I cannot prove that that is the case. But just it's a relevant fact for your audience that, and I don't know if he is right now, and I don't know if that has to be disclosed, but Bill Gates has short sold Tesla in the past, right? So there are big names who have short sold Tesla that you will recognize and that your audience would recognize. Again, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that any individual of those people is behind that, but I'm saying these people have hundreds of billions of dollars on the line, hundreds, right? How, why wouldn't you fund this, right? If you had hundreds of billions of dollars on the line. I mean, what you've seen the protests against Tesla have cost probably in the tens of millions collectively. I mean, that's peanuts compared to what's on the line. So why wouldn't you, I guess?
Yeah. I guess how does this work though? Because I'm always curious of this. Are there people who like their whole job is to be a paid protester and they just show up like that, like you put an ad out or something? Like where do you find these people? Or are these people that are already organized in some way and then they get in touch with these groups that are paying them?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, so I can only comment on how we do it. I can tell you a little bit about how other people might do it. How we do it is we always like to source people who are passionate about the cause. So, number one, we get a ton of people reaching out to us every day on our website who want to work with us. But primarily, even though we have that database, we oftentimes will proactively reach out to people for a protest. Like, let's just say we're doing an environmental protest. We will often reach out to local environmental groups and compensate them essentially to be part of the protest and to have their people part of an environmentalist protest that we're doing. So the protest, let's just say, might be funded by wealthy homeowners who are trying to stop some sort of eyesore from being constructed, right, near their homes. So this is just a purely hypothetical example. So wealthy homeowners pay us essentially to stop this giant ugly apartment building that's being constructed near them, or maybe it's a power plant, or maybe it's a wind turbine, whatever, right? We then are hired to essentially organize demonstrations around that. Well, why not start with, we'll often start by sort of reaching out to our networks of here's an environmentalist protesters who don't like these things anyway. We will essentially compensate them to go out. Like they wouldn't go out there for free because, hey, there's plenty of other stuff that they would want to do. But this is an opportunity for us to essentially compensate them for supporting something they already support, right? So that's kind of roughly how it works on
One of
our.
the one of the things we heard a lot about when these hands-off protests started was that there were protesters who had no idea what they were protesting.
Mhm.
And I think Stephanie referenced in one of our episodes, someone was holding up a sign that didn't even know what the sign meant and had to like look at their partner who also didn't know what the sign meant, and they couldn't explain why they were there. How common is this? And are you seeing more of this in your own company, or is that not a thing for you?
We've been really trying to work in our company at Crowds on Demand to work essentially against doing that. And we're trying to actually increase our vetting of people. Because certainly there have been times, like in any company, you could have a Starbucks barista who doesn't know how to make coffee. That doesn't mean Starbucks doesn't know how to make coffee. That means they should have done more due diligence over that barista, right? So I suppose I'm not saying that there's never been anyone at Crowds on Demand who couldn't perfectly articulate the point, but what I'm saying on my level in when we are organizing events, we really try very, very hard to vet everybody. And that means we have someone whose job it is to interview everybody for typically about a half hour before each event to make sure that they understand the issue and agree with the issue that we're working on. So could that process have glitches? Absolutely. But our goal is for us to never have incidents like that. How that happened? Well, I have a couple of speculations on that because I've seen so many of these videos that have gone viral of protesters, again, who don't work for us, who that's happened. Number one, it goes back to what I said at the start of the show, which is there's this quote unquote coalition building part of like, hey, I'm part of the Chinese Students Union, and I'm gonna have we're linked with the Black Students Union, which is linked to the anti-Trump group, and we're all just gonna essentially go to each other's events, right? So part of it is there's some of that going on. But number two, you have to consider and that a lot of people have other reasons for going to protest. I always say, and sometimes people get mad at me, like most of the guys at Woodstock were just trying to get laid, right? Like it wasn't about Vietnam. I mean, come on, give me a break. They were trying to smoke pot and get laid, right? So when I see some of these videos, and I saw one that was from I think it was Mission Dolores Park in San Francisco, which is sort of like modern day Woodstock. I mean, the whole place you get a contact high just from walking through it, right? It's like, yeah, you're of course some of these guys are just there to get laid and show that they're with the cause. And it's, by the way, it's a smart way to get laid because in a world where there's a 50-point gender gap, particularly in Gen Zs, between men and women, if you're a guy who is liberal, especially in those places like San Francisco, and turn out, you're going to be like surrounded by women, right? So this is actually a great opportunity, frankly, for a lot of guys. So I don't blame them for doing that. Not in the slightest. So basically, I think part of it is coalition, part of it is trying to get laid. Part of it is people flexing on social media. I mean, I think you're seeing less of that with this than you did for BLM. I mean, BLM was nuts. I mean, you had like the housewives. I mean, one of the real housewives of Orange County who lived in, I think it was like a 10,000 square foot mansion in like one of the whitest neighborhoods in the whole state was out being like, oh, there's racism in our society. Yeah, well, it's like, what do you know about that? You know what I mean? Like, shut up,
I feel like
So,
it's mostly white women that are
yeah,
that are showing like that are on at least on social media that are attacking other people that have never probably personally dealt with it, but they're out there attacking other people.
yeah. I mean, and Karens have this reputation as a conservative thing of like some lady like calling the police on a young black family, which of course is terrible. But in many cases, there's Karens on the left who kind of essentially see it as their place to judge and to comment and where it's none of their business. Um but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why someone might be ill-informed. The other sort of answer to your question is you have to look at some of these unions, these labor unions. Is they now I know in the industrial unions, a lot of the membership has swung for Trump in the Midwest, but most of the unions on the coasts are pretty firmly with the Democrats, and the leadership is 100% with the Democrats. And what these guys do, and by the way, this is why I think the AOC Bernie rallies are 100% bought and paid for, is these are the people who they send out to the Bernie Ocasio-Cortez rallies, right? So the labor union says, hey, all you guys, you better go to this rally. Well, they have a ton of members, right? Because remember, you have to join a union, right? If I'm work as a hotel employee, I have to go join the union. Even if I don't want to, I have to, right? So that doesn't reflect their popularity. They just have to join the union, right? So these guys, they turn out a ton of these union members to these events. And by the way, if you go to these, if you're a union member who keeps going to these protests or rallies, whatever, you're going to find yourself rewarded. You're going to get good shifts. You're going to get good time off. if you're someone who says, hey, I don't want to participate in this, oh, suddenly you're working the midnight to 7 a.m. shift, right? So unions have a huge capacity to punish their membership or reward their membership. I mean, this has been the case ever since the 1800s of Boss Tweed running Tammany Hall in New York City, right? So I think like the Bernie AOC stuff is totally 100% bought and paid for, and with it's the unions who are in attendance, and it's probably some oligarchs who are paying the bills, right? And um, which is ironic, of course, because they're like, oh, we hate oligarchs. Well, no,
Right.
I don't think they do.
Yeah.
So so yeah, I mean, but this is sort of the reality of what's going on. And again, by the way, the key point in all of this is none of this stuff, none of it that we suggested is at all illegal, right? It isn't illegal to do any of those things. So, the reality is people have different incentives for showing up at a protest. So what we do is basically we provide an incentive for people to show up, no different from Instagram flexing, trying to get laid, trying to impress your union, whatever. They're all quote unquote ulterior motives, but ulterior motives are not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, even if you think about it, I mean, I remember one of my favorite classes I took was a graduate course in ethics at UCLA. And we talked so much about ulterior motives, but the professor said ulterior motives aren't necessarily a bad thing. We all have motives, right? And very, very few people have a pure motive, right? Like I told you at the very start why I'm on the show, right? And you have me on the show because we have an interesting discussion. You're going to get listeners from it. You're going to get engagement from it. We
Right.
both have our motivations. That's not a bad thing, right? It's not a bad thing to essentially say, hey, I'm out at a protest, and it's not just because I'm in favor or against this particular issue.
Okay, I have a question because, at the very beginning, and I really appreciate how you said that you're pro, free speech, but obviously not the violence that we see sometimes with these protests.
Mhm.
And I know you can't say for sure, you can only say what's happened with your company, but what's your opinion or guess on like the people, for example, that are spray painting swastikas on Teslas? Are they just people doing that because they're pissed off, or do you think they're being funded and told, hey, go and do this or go throw Molotov cocktails? Like, where does that come in? Are they being paid by whoever these, elites of the world are that are funding these things?
So, yeah, so this is a really interesting question, and I'll answer it by what I call the Russian doll model. So, the Russian doll model is Russian dolls are like little dolls that fold into bigger dolls,
Yeah.
right? So, think of it as the center, the small, tiny little doll, let's just say, is some left wing billionaire, right? And the furthest out doll is the person doing what you described. They're throwing the Molotov cocktail, they're spray painting the swastika, whatever, right? So the idea is you want to have as many layers between the billionaire and the Molotov cocktail thrower such that both ideally are ignorant of one another, right? So that's to say the Molotov cocktail thrower doesn't want to be like, oh, some billionaire put me up to this. He's not going to feel he wants to feel like he's really cool for throwing that, right? It's not going to feel good if he feels like it's part of some oligarch's plan, right? Okay. Conversely, the billionaire doesn't want to have he's a billionaire because he's smart, right? He's not, or she is not going to ever make an order of fund the violence. He doesn't have to, right? This is like Don Corleone of the mafia. All this person says is, I'm really upset with Tesla. I'm really upset with Musk. I'm allocating $20 million to efforts to
Mhm.
fund action again on this subject. And This person directs their lieutenant, who then creates a 501(c)(4) advocacy group, who might create a company, who might fund some academic program. And there's 8, 9, 10 layers between that person. So there's plausible deniability on all ends. So could this be funded by left-wing billionaires? Absolutely. But good luck proving it. You won't be able to, because that left-wing billionaire, because they're so smart, has never given that instruction in so many words.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And they
What
don't have.
about, yeah. What about the role of the media in these protests? Is it something that's coordinated beforehand, or how does that narrative play out?
So, I mean, it's no surprise that media will always hype up protests that help their narrative, right? So obviously you're going to have left-wing media that's going to hype up left-wing protests, just like, in fairness, Fox majorly hyped up the Tea Party protests. I mean, there were initially when so the Tea Party, my understanding, was funded initially by the Koch brothers and their network, right? In 2010. So, these guys are very connected. They know the Murdochs, right? Who run Fox. So there were initially the rallies. There's a lot of coverage. They grew, but the initial rallies were not that large. There were a few people in those like Tea Party, like Sam Adams, like kind of Revolutionary War enactment costumes. They kind of looked silly, but they were covered heavily on Fox and conservative media, right? Hyped up, and then the movement grew from there, right? Or I mean, remember, I'm old enough to remember Joe the
Yeah.
plumber from the McCain campaign,
Right.
2008, right? There's this definitely goes both ways, where media is gonna hype up, and protest organizers know this. So yeah, I mean, if you're organizing an anti-Trump rally, you're going to get coverage from MSNBC if you meet a certain threshold of attendance, right? And vice versa on the other side, for sure. Um, so I mean, that's not exactly news, but I don't think the media is involved in the coordination of it. Like, I don't think the media is telling people, oh, put people here, put people there. I mean, if it is, maybe in some cases, and it'll come out. Sort of like Chris Cuomo and Andrew Cuomo were kind of coordinating media strategy. But I think even a CNN or MSNBC, if someone was actually coordinating with the protesters, that would certainly be a violation of their sort of journalistic duties. So I don't think that happens, but I think the protest organizers know people at CNN, so they just say, "Hey, we'll be here at this time." And I mean, and to be fair, we've done this ourselves. So I'm not trying to say I've never done this. Like, we do this, like everyone does this. And you always try to get out the media who you think are going to be friendly to your cause.
What about social media? Like part of these campaigns, does it include a social media campaign where you're sending people online
Sure.
to, comment or make videos or,
Yeah,
get the
absolutely.
narrative online to be a certain way?
Absolutely. I mean, social media is very effective in that in basically taking something on the ground and kind of exponentially increasing the reach of it. So you take a sort of physical thing, and then you kind of, like, you can grow it through social media. So that's huge. And again, I mean, part of that is the platforms. I mean, like Twitter used to be, I mean, Twitter when it was started was sort of this like Wild West where anything could spread on either side. Then the management really took it far to the left. Now Elon has sort of taken it far to the right. And now you have Blue Sky that really is amplifies left-wing orthodoxy, right? So you basically have Twitter that focuses sort of right and center, and Blue Sky that focuses left, right? And then you've got Facebook, and some people post politics on Instagram, I know. And TikTok too, which I, think should be banned. But at any rate, I think social media can be effective. Um, but I also feel that social media has often become the real question that I can't answer this is to what extent has social media become a way to engage people in affairs, and to what extent has it become a place where people decide to engage in social media as a replacement for actual political participation, voting, door knocking, all of those things. So, example of this is um I think there was a gentleman, Jamal Bowman. He was a far left representative from New York. He had millions and millions on social media, and he was primaried actually by a centrist Democrat who I'm pretty sure had like 5,000 social media followers. And that centrist won because that centrist knocked on doors and had a coalition in that neighborhood. So social media can be effective, but where it's dangerous is thinking it's a replacement for actual political engagement, because Jamal Bowman and the same happened with a lady named Cori Bush in St. Louis, Missouri, who also far left, got primaried by a moderate Democrat. Same thing. She had millions of social media followers. The challenger had a few thousand social media followers. But again, the challenger did the work. Cori Bush is posting TikToks or whatever, right? So I think social media is important, but it's not really a replacement for actually going door to door, talking to people, meeting people, and turning out, because those social media people aren't actually the ones who are taking the action. And that's sort of the challenge.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I see it with our page. I feel like I feel like conservatives, especially on TikTok, are really attacked a lot. And what I'll see is the same comment, like the same exact comment by like all these different accounts. And I always wonder, like, what is this, a bot? Or are these people being paid? And it's like, here's your line, go spread it. Or, so I was just curious, but I
I
had a
think so.
feeling.
There are bots out there. I mean, it's gone more and more challenging because the algorithms are in to the credit of social media companies have made that harder. But if you have enough funding, you can just hire a team of people who just do nothing but have used their legitimate accounts to post on social media. And there are people who do, and there are people who do it unpaid. I mean, there are people who truly have Trump derangement syndrome. Like, I think the conservatives use the term Trump derangement syndrome too loosely. Like, I think you can despise Trump and not have Trump derangement syndrome. I think Trump derangement syndrome is when you've basically let Trump take over your entire life, ruin your relationships, ruin your friendships, ruin your family, right? And all you can focus on is, oh my God, I can't believe he said that. Oh my God, I can't believe he did that. And in fairness, there are people on the right who sort of have some form of that on the other side of liberal derangement. And the best way is never let the other side win by letting them making you sweat. You know what I mean? You can, like, the ultimate win is to be able to just smile when you see your family that disagree and say, hey, we see it differently, but I love you anyway, and we have plenty of other stuff in common.
That's
Yeah.
why I love this conversation because I feel like there's probably a lot of things we disagree on, but we're just having a conversation. No one's getting upset with one another, and
Yeah.
we don't have to walk on eggshells. We can just have a real conversation. I feel like that has really been lost,
Yeah.
especially over the last I mean, hell, probably 8 years,
Yeah.
Yep.
where it's just there's so many emotions tied into it. People have lost the ability to have a conversation around differing views. And I think
Yes.
that's really sad as a society.
It's
Yeah.
true. Um, yeah, it's really true. I think there are a few inflection points on that. You've had the election of Obama, I think, started sort of this polarization where, and then you had the election of Trump, you had the pandemic, and now you essentially have the latest election, right? The 24 election, all four of those things really all polarized people to different degrees. But I think there's now hopefully recognition that it's like, whoa, this has gone way too far. And I really like make it a point to have friends on all political sides and to evangelize the idea that everyone should.
What was your role in this past election? Like, were you funding protests on both sides of the aisle for both Kamala and Trump, or?
No, we would never do that. Without commenting on, I mean, I don't want to get into specifics on what our role was. But it's not just on, I will say this, it's not just on a federal level. We did a lot of local and state matters too that really are not, maybe they're loosely partisan, but they're more issue based. I think one misnomer about what Crowds on Demand does is that we're at the arm of one candidate or another. It's very rare for us to work for a candidate. We do, but it's much, much more common for us to work for an issue. So let's just say there's a group that wants tax reform or drug policy reform or that type of thing. We will try to make those views known to all candidates. That's more what we are paid to do, less so. And what I always try to say is, hey, let's make the case on to the right on the right issue and the left on the left issue. So let's just say it's drug reform. We might make the case to the Democrats about justice, and we might make the case to the Republicans about business climate, right? So I always try to say, though, that's more what we do in terms of issues, less in terms of candidate X is good, candidate Y is bad.
Okay.
Okay, I want to completely change the topic for a second because it's just as you're talking, I'm thinking about this. So I'm originally from Illinois. I have a lot of family and friends there, and I know a lot of homeschool parents there.
Mhm.
And what's happening is they're passing a bill, the homeschool parents don't like it. And so what I'm seeing is people going on social media and bitching about it, right? But they don't know what to do. They don't know, like, I'm like, are you signing a petition? Are you organizing? And it's like none of them know. They're just bitching on social media. I feel like this would be a situation where maybe something like what you offer would be helpful in helping them just maybe organize because there's no plan of how they're going to combat this other than let's just go on social media and complain about it.
Have
What
they
would you
tried
say to
sending
them?
donuts to JB Pritzker?
That would be a good strategy, actually.
Well, start with that. See how that goes.
Right.
That guy. Yeah, it's interesting, and he's fighting the oligarchs too. Like how much money does he have? Yeah, Chicago. He looks. I mean, Trump always says central casting. He does look like central casting, like a Chicago party boss. I mean, he
Hmm.
looks like he looks the part. I mean, yeah, but the serious answer to your question is it's an uphill battle because you have a state that is controlled from one city of Chicago, but that is by and large a conservative state, with the exception of one city and a few other maybe little areas. And yeah, I have family out in a lot of family out in Springfield, Illinois. So yeah, I know the area well. The answer is you have to appeal to it on common sense. And this is actually one of those cases where if you want something done in a Democrat run state, you've got to make your case to moderate Democrats. And Republicans, whether you like it or not, don't actually have the capacity to make this happen. So there are moderate common sense Democrats in Illinois that don't like I think there's a gentleman, for example, he's an alderman in Chicago, Ray Lopez. I think he's a Democrat, but he's spoken out against the high crime defund the police policies that were in Lori Lightfoot's Chicago, right? And so there are people in the Democratic Party who would support you, but you have to find the ones, number one, who are not in the arm of the teachers union, right? Because the teachers union, very, very powerful in Illinois. But so you have to, I think it's a part of partially it's coalition building. You have to find the Democrats who have defied the teacher union and make the case to them of, hey, you don't have to love everything that we teach in homeschool to support the right of students to have this, right? To have this opportunity. And in many parts of rural parts of the state, there's another case. This isn't part of it is like a lot of people think, oh, homeschool, it's just these Christian fundamentalists trying to teach creationism. When there are kids who have learning disabilities who need that attention from mom and dad, right? There are kids with all kinds of different issues that might need that homeschooling. And in many districts, they don't have the resources to provide those things. So letting moderate Democrats who are not in the bed with the teachers union know about their stories, I think would be an effective way to start. But you're not going to be able to do it with Republicans alone. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Trying to find the common values with the moderate Democrats and not just throwing out these like conservative talking points that some of them are doing online. And it's like, well, that's not going to win over anyone
I mean,
on
the
the.
other way to do it is to try to get Trump to flex his muscles, right, on them and say, well, if you don't allow this, we're going to cut all your education funding, again, but that only works so many times. I mean, and by the way, I oppose that as someone who believes in the federalist system. I don't believe the federal government should be using its purse to intimidate states into submission, because you wouldn't like it if they did that. If if Ocasio-Cortez becomes president in 4 years, she might do the same thing and say, if Mississippi doesn't allow gender transition from 5 years old, we're taking all your education funding, right? Like that, they wouldn't like that. So I don't believe that the Fed should be using the purse strings in that way. I think they need to do the old school way of actually getting it done within the state legislature.
Who do you think is like the person running the Democrat Party now? Like I know everyone is talking about this in the media and stuff, but who is their person?
There's no one. That's why it's so chaotic. I mean,
Yeah.
right now,
That's
I'll leave you with this thought: is that the challenge is right now in the Democratic Party is essentially there is a major power struggle between, and it's not just two groups. It's not just progressive versus moderate. That's almost too simplistic. I mean, you definitely have the radicals like Ocasio and Bernie. You have the sort of traditionalists like Obama, Pelosi, right? Establishment that aren't even moderate, but they're establishment, right? They're pro-business, they're not socialists, right? Then you have moderate, Bill Maher, that type of person and Gavin Newsom is now claiming to be a moderate, which is false, but he sees where the wind is blowing, you know what I mean? So no one's running it. TBD. It's whatever it is. It's not that Ken whatever guy who says he's the head of the DNC. He's Ken Martin. I don't even know who the heck that is.
yeah.
So no one's running it. There's a power struggle. We'll see what happens. But if I have anything to do with it, it'll be someone who is moderate, thinking completely outside of the box. I just listened to an interview with Jon Stewart and Pete Buttigieg, and I don't agree with everything that they say by any stretch, but they're both pretty reasonable people. And like, I'd love for that to be the ticket. They like someone who can actually have this discussion and wants to build bridges instead of build walls.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got a question for you because you've now brought him up twice. And I'm originally from California. And so Gavin Newsom is
One second.
someone.
I
Oh,
do have to, sorry, I do have to run.
oh, okay, no
Yeah.
worries.
I'm so sorry, but I
That's
wish I had more time to get into Gavin Newsom. Have me back on, and I'll do a whole segment with you on Gavin Newsom. I could literally go for like 2 hours about his like all white neighborhood, his, Republican family wife, his ex was previously with Trump Jr. He cheated on his wife with his chief of staff's wife, his best friend's wife. I mean, the guy is a scumbag, but I can't do justice to it in 30 seconds. So
So
thanks, guys.
suffice it to say, you do not support him running for president.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Adam, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it, and we'll definitely have you back to dive into that a little more.
Thank you so much, Tara and Stephanie. Great discussion. We'll be back anytime.
All right.
Thank
Thanks everyone
you.
for tuning
Thanks.
in. We'll see you here next time.